For decades, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs has been considered the very cornerstone of Disney's animated heritage. Mention that title in any crowd and you'll see a wave of nostalgia light up people's faces. But if you've ventured into the depths of social media lately, you've likely noticed a very different mood surrounding the Snow White name. Instead of warm memories and Disney magic, the conversation is thick with controversy. Critics and fans are at each other's throats, debates are raging, and at the center of it all stands Rachel Zegler, an acclaimed performer whose recent comments about the beloved fairy tale have set off a firestorm. Many are accusing Disney of outright betraying a classic, while others say this shift was long overdue. Whichever side you land on, there's no denying that the upcoming Snow White remake has become one of the most contentious reimaginings in recent memory. And now, to crank up the intensity, South Park has jumped into the mix with a blistering satire that spares no one, Disney least of all. The question is, are these changes a fresh, necessary modernization of a dated story? Or are they an unnecessary overhaul that disrespects the spirit of the original? Let's unpack the heated debate swirling around Rachel Zegler's Snow White, Disney's apparent new agenda, and why South Park decided to take it all to task in a way only South Park can. When Walt Disney first unveiled Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937, it wasn't just a technological achievement, it was a cultural milestone. Animation, up until that point, was largely dominated by short cartoons, comedic sketches, or experimental works. A full-length animated feature with emotion, memorable songs, and a heartfelt story.
Crying on that stage.
When am I not crying in public? It's so upsetting.
Why were you crying?
Oh my gosh, I saw the well, we didn't even see. But I saw the logo and I went, that's my name, Snow White's up there, and I cried my eyes out.
What was it like seeing yourself for the first time in full Snow White drag?
I love that description. It's perfect. Oh my God. Well, when you get to wear Sandy Powell, first of all, insane. And then you get to be lit by Mandy Walker and Nadia Stacey designed your hair and makeup. It's like the most incredible thing.
That was unheard of. Yet Walt Disney took that gamble and transformed the genre forever. Children around the world were enchanted by Snow White's innocence, her connection with nature, and those seven dwarfs brimming with personality. Through every re-release and every generation, Snow White retained its wonder and timelessness. Songs like Someday My Prince Will Come and Whistle While You Work became inseparable from the Disney brand. Even the old animation style, once considered cutting edge, blossomed into a defining characteristic of classic Disney. So, when the idea of a live-action Snow White remake started floating around, people had mixed emotions. Some were curious to see modern filmmaking breathe new life into a vintage story. Others were fiercely protective, worried that any change would rob the fairy tale of the charm that made it so universally beloved. The tension only grew when Disney announced that Rachel Zegler would star as Snow White. On one hand, Zegler is recognized as a gifted vocalist and actress. Her performance in West Side Story garnered serious praise, and she demonstrated a powerful presence on screen. But it didn't take long for some to raise questions about the core symbolism embedded in the name Snow White. Traditionalists pointed out that the story highlights her skin as white as snow, tying directly into the original Brothers Grimm tale from which Disney adapted the character. Disney framed Zegler's casting as an exciting, inclusive step forward. However, critics accused the studio of ignoring the specifics of the original text purely for the sake of what they labeled performative wokeness. The argument wasn't about disliking Zegler's heritage. Rather, fans wondered why Disney insisted on reusing a classic story in ways that might clash with its established mythology, instead of creating a brand new character who could embody diversity in a more organic way. Meanwhile, Zegler herself appeared optimistic. Initially, she posted about how thrilled she was to take on such a legendary role, even if some factions of the fanbase weren't quite ready to embrace her version of the iconic princess. As production continued, more details trickled out that fueled the flames of debate. Rumors spread that this Snow White remake wouldn't just tinker with minor plot points, it would wholesale remove or radically reshape elements considered central to the narrative. Chief among these rumors was the near erasure of the prince's significance in the story. Instead of a romantic focus, the new Snow White supposedly embarks on a self-discovery journey with hardly a nod to her original love interest. And then there was the question of the dwarfs. Longtime fans were aghast to hear that the seven dwarfs, each with their own personality, might be sidelined or reinterpreted to avoid stereotypes. Although these dwarfs have been criticized over the years for comedic cliches, they're still a cherished part of the Snow White identity. Many felt that removing them would be like rewriting the story from scratch. But perhaps the most incendiary aspect of this remake came directly from Zegler's own comments. She didn't mince words when dismissing the original plot as out of date, calling Snow White naive and the story lacking. In her view, this new version would fix those flaws by giving Snow White agency and modern sensibilities. While that philosophy might resonate with certain contemporary audiences, plenty of devoted Disney fans balked. They felt it was one thing to gently update a fairy tale for modern times, but another to disregard a cherished classic as antiquated.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
In the digital age, if people have a strong opinion, they go online to vent. Fans took to Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and pretty much every social media platform to voice their shock, anger, or support. Hashtags proclaiming "I'm not my Snow White" started trending among Disney purists, while others countered with hashtags urging positivity and inclusivity. Content creators posted hours of reaction videos, dissecting everything from behind-the-scenes leaks to each new snippet of an interview with Zegler. Some believed Zegler's approach was progressive, celebrating the idea of a princess who stands firmly on her own 2 feet, unburdened by a need to be rescued. Others argued it was disrespectful to dismiss the romantic aspect that formed a core part of Disney's first-ever princess tale. After all, Snow White famously awakened from her cursed slumber thanks to a heartfelt kiss. Whether viewers see that as archaic or not, it remains etched in cinematic history. Complicating matters further was Zegler's sometimes brash tone. In a handful of interviews, she referred to the original romance as if it were an inconvenience that needed erasing. To critics, it sounded like she was ridiculing a film that countless fans hold dear. Audiences wondered why someone who apparently disliked the original so much had chosen to portray its lead character. While Zegler had defenders who championed her as a much-needed breath of fresh air, the avalanche of criticism on social media suggested that Disney might have a significant public relations challenge on its hands. Cue the South Park creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who have a reputation for fearlessly skewering pop culture phenomena. In a new episode that references Disney's push for inclusive casting and storyline revamps, the show left no doubt about its stance. Hollywood's so-called woke agenda can sometimes come off as shallow or pandering when it disrupts the essence of a beloved narrative. South Park didn't hold back. They depicted a scenario that looked suspiciously like a jab at Rachel Zegler's Snow White, complete with lines poking fun at race-swapping and gender-swapping iconic characters. In the episode, Disney executives, in typical South Park fashion, were portrayed as frantic, clueless, and motivated only by the fear of losing audience share. For fans who already felt betrayed by Disney's changes, this satire acted like a megaphone. It amplified their frustration and broadcast it to a huge audience who might not have followed every detail of the controversy. Meanwhile, fans who supported diversity found themselves torn. They believed in more inclusive storytelling but couldn't ignore the comedic sting of South Park's portrayal. After all, if diversity is just a marketing tool rather than a genuine attempt at telling more representative stories, is it truly progressive? South Park forced viewers to confront that question head-on. Disney, for its part, may have hoped to let the criticism die down, but the massive platform of a show like South Park essentially ensured that wouldn't happen anytime soon. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled that Disney was not at all pleased by the mocking tone of South Park's coverage. Some insiders suggested frantic phone calls were made, possibly in an attempt to dissuade the show from doubling down on future episodes. But if there's one thing everyone knows about Stone and Parker, it's that they rarely back down from a creative confrontation, especially if it involves a major corporation. Moreover, the negative reactions to Zegler's interviews and the potential storyline shakeups started to coalesce into a genuine concern for Disney's executives. Could this blow up in the studio's face at the box office? Every big budget project comes with enormous financial stakes. and negative publicity can sometimes derail ticket sales. If a significant segment of Disney's core audience feels alienated, it might lead to a financial disappointment that overshadows whatever progressive message the studio tried to communicate. Adding to the pressure is the memory of other recent live-action remakes, like The Little Mermaid, where casting controversies became major talking points. While that film ultimately performed decently, the narrative of Disney is forcing political correctness hardened among certain fans. Now, with Snow White, a property widely considered the origin of the Disney princess era, that narrative has grown to a roar. Even the best PR strategies might struggle to drown it out if the negative sentiment keeps compounding. This dispute over Snow White isn't an isolated scuffle. It's part of a broader conversation about how we update treasured stories for modern audiences. In some ways, the debate highlights a culture clash between those who see fairy tales as living documents that can and should be reinterpreted, and those who believe these stories should remain faithful to their time-honored roots. Disney's critics argue that the studio is missing an opportunity to create original content that genuinely reflects diverse voices, rather than simply overlaying a new identity on a pre-existing character. They claim that each time Disney opts for a race swap in a remake rather than crafting a brand new protagonist, it reinforces the notion that diversity can only appear through appropriation of older stories. Fans from various backgrounds have voiced that, yes, representation is crucial, but they want it done thoughtfully, with new narratives that resonate naturally. On the flip side, supporters of the changes suggest that original fairy tales, many of them centuries old, shouldn't be treated as untouchable relics. They argue that if we're going to retell these stories for kids today, the values and messages should evolve. Why hold on to tropes that might be outdated or even harmful? And if casting a Latina actress as Snow White signals to young viewers that princesses come in all backgrounds, then perhaps that alone justifies the shift. What's fascinating is how a single remake can spark such profound discussions on identity, art, and tradition. South Park's involvement adds yet another layer, lampooning the entire scenario and challenging both fans and studios to question their motivations. Are we all so busy trying to be inclusive or to protect tradition that we've lost sight of what really makes a story magical? Namely, good storytelling that resonates on a universal level. Social media has revealed just how deeply this controversy cuts. Some older fans remember the wonder of seeing Snow White tiptoe through the forest for the first time, the dwarfs chanting, "Hi-ho," and the sweet optimism woven into the original plot. For them, hearing that the prince might be reduced to a side note or that the dwarfs might vanish altogether feels like an assault on a piece of their childhood. Younger audiences, or those open to reinterpretation, see this as a chance to break free from the damsel in distress narrative. They cheer the idea of a more independent Snow White who doesn't revolve around a romance. But even among these supporters, some dislike the tone in which the changes have been publicized. They cringe at Zegler's dismissive language about the original story, fearing it might overshadow the positive intent behind the adaptation. Meanwhile, entertainment analysts question whether this divisive approach might hamper the film's commercial prospects.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in.
It's one thing for a movie to generate headlines through controversy, but quite another for it to face possible boycotts from longtime Disney fans. We've seen modern box office bombs caused by fan outcry before, and big studios can't afford to disregard the passionate Disney audience who has been loyal for generations. One reason Disney might be on edge is that South Park has a long track record of shaping public opinion through satire. The show's loyal following has, on multiple occasions, sparked real-world debates after key episodes. When South Park zeroes in on a topic, it often pushes it further into the mainstream consciousness. In that sense, the Snow White controversy isn't just about the film itself anymore. It's about how pop culture at large sees Disney. The specific jabs at Rachel Zegler, from her public statements to what some perceive as a lack of respect for the original film, are now set against a comedic backdrop that millions have watched. People who might have otherwise shrugged off the Snow White debates are suddenly intrigued because South Park drew attention to it in an over-the-top, satirical style. This widespread spotlight can be both beneficial and damaging. Beneficial in the sense that it might drive curiosity and attention to the upcoming movie, but damaging if the prevailing sentiment is that Disney is simply pandering without real substance. Moreover, we can't ignore that Snow White isn't the only remake stirring controversy. Disney's Mulan was criticized for shooting near contentious regions and for losing key elements like Mushu and the original soundtrack, leading some to say it lost its heart. The Lion King remake faced complaints about its photorealistic style, lacking the expressive charm of the animated classic. Pinocchio, Dumbo, Aladdin, and others have all been subject to scrutiny for one reason or another. Sometimes for being too similar to the original, other times for straying too far. This pattern might indicate a broader issue. Are Disney's remakes designed with a coherent vision? Or are they churned out to capitalize on nostalgia while attempting to nod toward modern values? The Snow White debate is perhaps the most explosive example to date, because it involves the very first Disney princess. And if the negative buzz around these remakes keeps growing, it could force the studio to reevaluate its strategy going forward. In the end, this looming showdown over Rachel Zegler's Snow White might be a pivotal moment for Disney. Will the finished film successfully walk the tightrope between respectfully updating a classic and honoring what made it beloved in the first place? Or will audiences reject it, viewing the changes as a shallow attempt at appeasing a modern checklist without genuinely capturing the magic of the original? South Park's satire has undeniably fanned the flames, turning the controversy from a niche debate among Disney diehards into a broader cultural conversation. If Disney doesn't handle this carefully, it could tarnish the nostalgia so many hold dear. And in today's climate, brand loyalty can be lost overnight. On the flip side, if the new Snow White manages to surprise critics, win over longtime Disney fans, and present a well-crafted story that resonates across generational lines, it might prove that classics can evolve in meaningful ways. After all, fairy tales have been retold and reshaped for centuries. The trick is to do it in a way that feels authentic, purposeful, and respectful toward the spirit of the original tale. As we wait for the film's release, opinions remain fiercely divided. Will Snow White remain a symbol of innocence and timeless hope? Or will she be recast in the public imagination as just another battleground in the culture wars over wokeness? Whichever way it shakes out, one thing is certain: the conversation has grown beyond just one remake. It's about how we balance preservation of cherished stories with the desire or pressure to reimagine them for a changing world. So, keep your eyes on the headlines and watch as these debates continue to swirl. Maybe Disney will take a step back and tune into what fans are saying, or maybe they'll double down on their current path. Perhaps Rachel Zegler herself will refine her commentary, bridging the gap between new viewers and traditionalists. For now, all we can do is wait to see how this unfolds and hope the final product offers something that both longtime fans and modern audiences can embrace. Until then, ask yourself, where do you draw the line between progressive storytelling and altering a classic so thoroughly that it becomes unrecognizable? Is Disney leading the conversation on inclusivity, or are they just trying to score points with superficial changes? And is South Park really crossing boundaries, or simply shining a spotlight on a complicated issue that's begging for a more honest discussion? Whatever your answer, the Snow White remake is shaping up to be more than just another movie. It's a cultural flashpoint testing the boundaries of how much we can, or should, revamp a cherished piece of history. And with Disney's star power, Rachel Zegler's headlines, and South Park's relentless satire all in play, you can be sure this story won't fade away quietly. So brace yourselves for an avalanche of hot takes, think pieces, and social media meltdowns. The saga is far from over, and if you're a fan of either classic Disney or animated comedy, you won't want to miss a single twist in this ongoing debate.